right? Nothing had been inserted into the construction materials somehow. That was the Russian side of the deal. The American side of the deal was different. The American side of the deal for our building in Moscow, the U.S. government negotiated that, yes, American workers and American officials would be responsible for all the finish work, like the fine work inside the building. But when it came to the basic guts of the building, like the beams and the concrete and the precast floor panels and all the columns, those would all be prefab manufactured in Soviet facilities by Soviet workers and then brought complete onto the construction site where the U.S. would watch, basically, while the Russian workers assembled our new embassy for us in Moscow. We made this deal. So yeah, like American workers got to put in the windows and the doors and stuff. And when it came to the actual building, that was built by the Russians for us. Oh, it's very nice of them. They controlled the design. They controlled all the fundamental construction. The building of that embassy in Moscow started in 1979. By 1979, by 80, by 81, by 82, the U.S. realized we had a serious problem on our hands with that building. These 7,000-pound precast pieces of the building were arriving at the building site to be installed in the new embassy. They were arriving completely made. People who were in charge of making sure the embassy wasn't going to be spied on said from the very beginning, whoa, this is going to be a problem. The U.S. had security engineers reviewing the construction materials as best they could, but the Russians were running the design and the construction process. By 1982, the U.S. government was so worried that we had secretly dispatched a specially trained team of bug detectors for the still under construction building. And I kid you not, they were trained rock climbers. They put dudes in rock climbing harnesses and special cold weather gear that had been supplied by Eddie Bauer. And in the dead of night, in the dead of the Moscow winter, with temperatures dipping to 40 degrees below zero, they had these guys, these specialists, rappelling down the sides of the building under construction with specially made X-ray machines to try to find all the Russian bugs. And boy, did they find a lot of Russian bugs. New York Times did a great recap in 1988 as to what had gone wrong with the case of the bugged embassy. Quote, they discovered interconnecting systems so sophisticated they couldn't be removed from the steel and concrete columns, the beams, the precast floor slabs, the sheer walls between the columns. They found electronic packages where a piece of steel reinforcement in the flooring should have been. They found resonating devices that allowed the Russians to monitor electronic and verbal communications. One engineer who worked on the site from 1980 to 1982 said, quote, we found things that didn't belong there based on the shop drawings. We found cables in the concrete. And it wasn't like some low-level hack job. It was very sophisticated. Ron Kessler from the Washington Post later wrote a book that touched on this subject, his book called Moscow Station. He explained in his book how some of the bugs the Russians put in the construction process were found in places where metal beams were welded together, and they would make the bugs out of materials that had the same density as the metal in the joint. So even if you did X-ray that joint, you wouldn't detect them. So the U.S. government negotiated for that building in 69, started building it in 79. By the early 80s, they'd gotten rock climbers to be rappelling down the outside of the building and building in the dead of night saying, this place is intrinsically bugged. By 1985, they actually stopped working on it when it was 2/3 done, and they kicked all the Russian workers out. And then the government appears to have had no idea what to do with their partially built, ruinously compromised KGB Christmas present that the U.S. taxpayers had just funded to the tune of many millions of dollars right in the heart of Moscow. And then on top of all that, the KGB won again at the U.S. Embassy, when for the first time in the history of the United States, a U.S. Marine was charged and convicted of espionage. KGB had sent young female officers to seduce and then blackmail U.S. Marines who were providing security at the existing American embassy facilities in Moscow while the new one was under construction. KGB knew it was illegal for the Marines to fraternize with local Russian women, so they did their best to get those Marines to break that rule, and then they squeezed them. They threatened to expose their wrongdoing unless these Marines helped them out. And so lots of young, attractive female KGB officers got all sorts of access to U.S. embassy facilities. In the worst instance, the Marine who was convicted of espionage and served 9 years in prison, he apparently handed over blueprints for the embassy facilities. And then as that Marine Moscow honey trap scandal was becoming public in 1987, the story also finally went public about the KGB embassy construction scam fiasco and how Russia was able to so intrinsically compromise the basic building bones of our embassy.
The new ambassador to Moscow, Jack Matlock, arrived today. His first job, secure the embassy. The State Department has asked the nation's top-secret national security agency to sweep the embassy before Secretary of State George Shultz arrives in 10 days. While Marines allegedly compromised the current embassy, lax security was just as damaging next door at the new embassy now under construction.
In part 4. Or was that part 3? I don't lost count.